Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. Happy to be back for part 2 of this Fundraising Made Easy training series in collaboration with Apex Advocacy and 50 by 40. So I'm going to take my glasses off. There's a bit of a reflection there. Today's session is going to be on donor communication, relation, and retention with Unny, and so excited for what he has to share with us today. And so I'll just start by, in case anyone is new and familiar and hasn't really heard about Apex before, I'll share a little bit about us. So Apex Advocacy really aims to increase the number of BIPOC individuals who participate in animal activism by advocating for collective liberation through animal rights, particularly in marginalized areas and communities that are disproportionately affected by the animal industrial complex. A program within Apex is the Global Majority Caucus, which I am the director of, and my name is Brielle Ringer, director of the Global Majority Caucus here, which was formerly at Encompass and had a very smooth and lovely transition over to Apex Advocacy. And so the Global Majority Caucus is a space specifically for Black, Indigenous, folks of color in the animal advocacy movement. And it's really a space that we've cultivated to have a sense of belonging, where we offer free community building events and professional development opportunities. And traditionally, the caucus has been a space where it's kind of like only the people in the caucus know what's going on in the caucus. And it's been this safe haven for people of the global majority, people of color in the movement. And lately, and going into 2023, we kind of wanted to let people get a peek in to see what's going on over here at the Global Majority Caucus, to experience some of the magic as well. We've been organizing some really cool training opportunities that are really geared towards the needs that I'm listening and hearing about within our community, but I know are also really beneficial for the larger animal advocacy community as well. And so this is kind of an opportunity for you to see what we have going on at the caucus. And so there's a little confusion at the last session. People are like, okay, what if I'm not a person of color? Like, how do I stay connected and involved? If you are not a person of the global majority and aren't able to be a part of like the caucus, we have events like this where there will be open to all occasionally that we offer. And Apex Advocacy, you can join our email list. So I'll drop all of those links in some more clear ways that you can stay connected. If you're inspired by this, there will be opportunities that are open for everyone. And then there are some things that we do within the Global Majority Caucus, like our monthly community check-in, that are just for folks of the global majority to kind of have a safe space of belonging and connection in the movement. So that's a little bit about the caucus and Apex, and we're so happy for you to be here and joining us. And we partnered up with 50 by 40, who also has a global majority program. And 50 by 40 is a coalition of organizations dedicated to cutting the global production and consumption of animal products by 50% by 2040. And their global majority program helps to build access to funds, access to knowledge, and increase representation. And so this was really an opportunity for us to come together and bring our communities together and expand our reach and impact, addressing a need that we consistently hear about, which is learning more about fundraising, having more access to funds. And so that was the intention behind us creating this series. As I shared, this is part 2 of the series. We have 2 more super inspiring and informative sessions coming up for you. I'll tell you more about at the end. And throughout the session today, please use the chat, interact with one another, share your insights, your own reflections, your questions. Unny has shared that he would love to kind of answer questions as going throughout. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass it on and let you take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Brielle. I'm really excited to be here and talk about donor communication, relation, and retention. And let me start a slideshow here. Great. And do you see a slide that says donor communication,
Yes, we
relation,
can.
and retention? Fantastic. Let me try to rearrange things here so I can get my screens all set up. Okay, great. My name is Unny. I'm a fundraising consultant, an organizer for animal and human justice, and I have had many roles to develop capacity for the animal protection movement. And in this presentation, we'll talk about communicating with our donors, developing relationships, and retaining donors. The slides that you see here, I'm going to make into a PDF, including my speaker notes. So, and I'll share that with you. I don't say all the things exactly as they come in the speaker notes, but just so you know, what I have there will be shared afterwards. As Brielle said, please ask questions as we go in the chat or raise your hand. I really love for things to be interactive, and there is enough time for us to answer questions. There's a lot of ground to cover, and I'm not going to hit everything. And so it's really good to be able to answer the questions that are really alive for you right now. So I have 3 goals for you today. And, one of them is to maybe learn a little bit from the things I say. The second one, even more importantly, is definitely practice. And we're going to have a breakout session to have a chance to practice. I'll tell you more about that later. And the third one is to meet other people. And, we are, as a movement, more powerful, and as people, more capable of doing fundraising and doing all of our work when we collaborate. So I hope the chat and the breakout room will be an opportunity for you to connect and reconnect with other folks. And as needed today, please take breaks, eat food, turn off your screen, take a nap, whatever you like. I think that's really fantastic. Self-care is really critical for powerful movements. Right, so let's get started. Well, that was fast. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the donor cycle. And I'm starting with, for the information I'm giving today, the most important thing. And if you just remember one thing, remember this. Actually, before I tell you what it is that we're going to remember, I'm going to ask you, what do you notice? Actually, let me explain this donor cycle, especially for people who can't see this. Okay, so the first step is identification. That's when we notice that somebody might be a potential donor. The next step is cultivation, where we get to know donors and they get to know us. The third step is, and this is what people think of when they think of fundraising, is solicitation, asking for money, right? We all know that part exists. And then the third part is stewardship, which is both thanking donors as well as updating them on the work that we've accomplished, right? So identification, potential donor, cultivation, getting to know each other, solicitation, asking, and stewardship, thanking, and updating. So I'm looking for a couple things here, and I want to ask you, what do you notice about this cycle?
Yeah, hi Uni, it's
Hi,
Bea
Bea. Yeah,
here.
great to see you.
Great to see you. So what I notice is that it continues, the circle continues, like after stewardship, it continues to cultivation. I don't know if I'm making this up, but it's a guess.
Absolutely, yeah. That's great. What else do folks notice? And, just a commentary on that, that circle is when people donate, when individual donors give, there's more opportunity to ask them in the future.
There's a few things in the chat I'll read just in case you can't see while you're sharing your screen. Cultivation and solicitation are quite large aspects of the cycle, whereas stewardship portion seems a bit shorter or smaller. And Emmanuel shares that the cycle can break.
Yeah, so you hit on one of the most important ones that I wanted to say, which is cultivation and solicitation are quite large. Well, really, what I'm getting at here, when we add it up, when people think about fundraising, they think of solicitation as the work. But as you can see here, the majority of this chart is not solicitation, right? And what I really want us to think about is that the majority of time that we're doing, when we're really doing our best fundraising, it's okay if we're not doing our best, we're going to do what we can. But when we're doing our best, more than 50% of the time is not asking for money, is doing this other work. And the other thing, this is a little subtle, maybe a color thing. Solicitation is critical, right? We know this is what we think of as fundraising. So that's critical, but it is not the majority of the work. Okay, and yeah, I missed the chat. I'm looking at a lot of screens here, trying to track all of this. But I have the chat up now, and I see that, and I appreciate the other things that folks are saying. Okay, so let's go on, and this is like some background of why we do what we do. This is like, why do we ask individuals for money? And this fits in really well with communication, relationship, and retention. So one reason, and I realize we have a lot of international folks here. I don't know what the situation is internationally, but here in the US, this is the breakdown of giving. So foundations about 19%, corporations 4%, bequests 10%, and individuals 68%. Does anybody here know what bequests mean? Okay, there's somebody who knows that explain what is bequests?
When somebody leaves you something in a will, so like an inheritance.
Right. So really what that is, that's actually also individual donors. It's just individual donors in a different form. So really individual donations in the US in 2021 is 75% of donations. That's where the money is. And I know a lot of you here today. I'm familiar with a lot of the work. I can even imagine maybe what some of folks want to start. And I assure you that the kind of work that we are doing, individuals are willing and able to give to that. And this is non-governmental money. There's a lot of money from the government. For the most of the work I've done, it is unfundable by the government. And you can imagine the challenges that would come along with that. But that is something to be aware of as well. Okay, so one reason we do individual donations is because this is where the money is. And another reason is reliability. So think of a well, right? You can draw water from it every year, right? And the water will remain plentiful and clean if you maintain the well, the soil, the filtration, and the climate. Like if we maintain the circumstances around the well, we can keep drawing money from it. Sorry, not money. Money is what we can get contributions from donors if we similarly do a good job of donor cultivation of communication. And the third one, this is my favorite, is this supports the rest of our work. I always want whatever I'm doing as an activist, organizer, and fundraiser is that if I'm not successful, that there's something that I win anyway. And as a fundraiser, I really want that. And this is communication and donor relationship is a great opportunity to communicate about your mission, getting your values and beliefs into the world. And a lot of the work that you do with communicating with donors can overlap into your communication with all of your other audiences. Great. So let's get into communication. Actually, before I go on any further, are there any questions? Great, no problem. Okay, so donor communication is two ways, right? We both want to learn about donors and we want to tell them about our work. So first I'm going to talk about, we'll talk about both, but first we're going to talk about learning about donors. And from the title, you might think, oh, donor communication, that's about like, how do we tell our story to our donors? That's absolutely the case. But I think that learning about your donors and hearing from them is even more important. And just a little side note here, a lot of what I'm talking about applies especially to large donors. And I'm going to talk like we're talking about doing one-on-one solicitation, but the concepts of all of this definitely apply to donors at any level. So why do people give? People give because they're connected to you, because they care deeply about your work, and very, very specifically your work, your mission, your values, your location, all kinds of things, and because they have the ability to give. So what do you want to know? You want to know all of the kinds of things about them that inform that, right? And so how are we going to learn that? We can ask them questions. So one thing that we want to know about, and I'm jumping into one of these challenging things right here, because I know this is really hard stuff. We want to know about their money situation, right? And how can we know this? Well, we can ask who they give to, who else they give to. Donors generally don't give to just one organization, even if we are 100% loyal to our group and this is our thing. Most donors give to multiple, if not many, organizations. How much they give, what their occupation is, what their background is. Sometimes folks inherit money. And so there's a few things that go along with this. Sometimes it takes some intimacy, developing intimacy, to ask these questions. Another thing is you might have to work through your own things to be able to have open conversations about money. And I've done that's a whole presentation itself, but just be aware of like your own the challenges around talking openly about money. And you need to work through that as a fundraiser. It's really, really, really critical. And then of course you use your judgment, right? I mean, there's a lot of judgment work that takes about what is appropriate and right. And there's a lot of context there that you'll have to learn to manage. And keep in mind that, when we're asking this, we're not simply trying to, figure out who is worth $10 million. If you're raising money on the order of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even a couple of $1 million, somebody who can give $1,000 is probably a very significant donor. And there are a lot of people at different income levels that can give $1,000. Great. And then the next thing we'll think about is goals. What is your donors' goals in life and in their activism, right? So, some of the questions we can ask them is, what do they think makes a powerful animal protection movement? Ask them how they know about you. So again, this is the connection. How do they connect it to you? Oh, thanks, Dina. You know this person? Great. What difference do they want to make in the world? How have they participated in the animal protection movement and maybe your organization? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to help them fulfill their goals, right? So they contribute to you. They're partnering with you to do the work. And then, we're developing this connectedness by having these kinds of conversations. So we'll get back to this part a little bit later, because this is what we're going to be practicing in the breakout group in a little bit. So in terms of process, I mentioned that what did I say was after solicitation? Was does anybody remember?
Stewardship.
Stewardship, right. So stewardship is thanking donors and updating them about their work. So in terms of the sequence, once somebody's donated, the next step is to thanking them. And then also, so you can do that immediately. You can do that a month later. You can do that 3 months later, a year later. All of those timings are good. It's very difficult to thank a donor too much. I've heard of a lot of people complain about being asked too much. I have rarely heard about a donor being saying that they've been thanked too much. And then at some point later, not immediately, is that you want to update them about the work that you've done that's been accomplished with their gift. So you want to highlight the good work that you're doing. And you want to evoke this feeling that they're part of this and that their work is powerful and meaningful. And this can correspond with what you've learned about them. And you want to do this regularly. Once a month is great. More often than that is okay. And I say this as we all have varying capacities and sizes of organizations, so you want to take into account what capacity that you have. And I know that sometimes when we're talking to a lot of donors, it can feel exhausting on our part, but especially to our devoted donors, that one call that you made to them, that one text message, that might be, one of the few times they're hearing from you when you're not asking for a donation. So it doesn't seem very often to them. And then we want to talk about our accomplishments. So we want to tell people what we did, how we spent the money. And this is about the work you accomplished, not primarily about budget line items. And, this is really important. I don't think that people really care whether you spent money on travel or salaries or an office space or food to care for an animal. What they want to care about is transformed relationships with animals and people, right? That's what the meaningful work is here. Of course, it's great to be very open and transparent about your money and exactly how you spent it. And when people have questions, to answer that and know that. But the most important thing is to talk about the transformation that you're accomplishing. So I'm going to tell a little story here myself about Frederick. So, what we're trying to do here is when we're giving updates about our work is we're trying to infuse your theory of change and tell stories about animals and people. And in this case, I'm going to tell a story about animal. The stories should illustrate your work in concrete terms with specific individuals with names. And stories have protagonists with personality, triumph, and struggles. And this can look like a lot of different things. So don't, it's hard to, I'm not going to try to encapsulate all the different ways in which stories can look like. So Frederick was from Soul Space Sanctuary, a sanctuary near where I live. And Frederick died a couple of years ago. Rest in power, Frederick. And so I'm going to tell this story like I am fundraising for Soul Space Sanctuary. So the first time I went to visit Soul Space several years ago, as I arrived, I saw Frederick in the distance and started to approach me and my friends and come a little closer up to the fence. And I made a mental note, oh, that's a goat. And then a little bit later, I got closer to Frederick and I saw that Frederick was a sheep. And then I felt really embarrassed. I thought, how can I not tell the difference between a sheep and a goat? I've been doing animal advocacy for so long and I don't know the difference. And then later, I was hanging out with the animals and hearing their stories. And what I heard about Frederick was really amazing, is that Frederick was raised with several dogs. And Frederick was really friendly. And actually, Frederick like nuzzled up against me and didn't seem to know that he was really huge and almost knocked me over. But I thought it was kind of fun because he was being really friendly. And then I realized that, oh, the reason I thought he was a goat is because his curious behavior and approaching us was more like what I might have thought a goat would act like. And, our sanctuary, Soul Space Sanctuary, we're caring for animals with personalities like Frederick. So this would be an example of, if somebody donated to Soul Space and I was telling them about the work that we do, that I might tell this story about Frederick. And it's really important that these stories are authentic. And, this is actually my experience, everything that I'm sharing with you. Okay, so another thing to communicate with donors. I see there's some questions in the chat, and I'll happy to answer that. Would you be able to share those questions with us?
I think the questions were referred to around donor goals, like what difference do they want to make in the world? How do they participate in the animal protection movement?
Yeah, I think that I will share these slides. I'll send that to Brielle, and Brielle can send that out, and the slides with the speaker notes too, which doesn't perfectly encompass that, but I think that we'll have most of that. Great. Yes, you are welcome. And then the other question is, do you think inviting donors to actions and grassroots campaigns could be a good thing, or could pressure them into saying yes and or making them uncomfortable? That is a great question. And I'll let me talk about that for a moment, because I've wondered that myself. And the short answer is yes, I think it's a great idea to do this. And there's a few different reasons. One is that there's going to be a lot of overlap between your donors and your volunteers and your activists. That's the case. And people donating money is one way that people contribute to the movement, and donating time and energy and talents is another way, right? So it's really good to invite them. And I think that the could pressure them into saying yes. I mean, that is a good question, because a lot of the ways in which we relate to people, what's important is doing that in a way that makes it an invitation and not a demand or an expectation. And doesn't, what we're not trying to do is push some shame on people for not doing enough, when some of your donors, all they're going to do is give. They're not going to participate otherwise, right? And we don't want to convey that we think that they have to do more to be a good enough activist, right? And so the way we do that is, a lot of it comes from within our own hearts and our own work of activism and organizing and approaching this with a feeling of abundance and opportunity, and not of a demand and expectation of people, right? So we have to do that work in ourselves, because that comes across in our tone. It's easy when I talk to you, if I were to ask somebody to do something, and I have this feeling like they better do this or they're not good enough, it'll probably come across in my tone. But it comes across in everything, in your text messages, in your emails, in your social media. That all comes across. So you want to do that from a place of abundance and awareness of, if you don't know the person, like let's say somebody is a donor, and either they're a donor that you have, you're talking one-on-one and you haven't met them, or it's a mass email to 1,000 people, and there's a lot of different people. You don't know that a lot of the recipients, what their relation is to being involved in campaigns and being activists, right? So you don't want to make assumptions. And then, sometimes you'll get to know donors, and it'll be easier to navigate this whole question about when to invite them or not. And, maybe somebody will say to you, I give because I am not able to go to these actions. I don't feel safe going out in the streets, or I don't have time, or what, there's a lot of reasons why people might not be involved in different things. Or let's say, it's a sanctuary, and they say, I can't get out to the sanctuary, or I have a hard time spending time outside with animals, whatever it might be. You might learn that from people. So that's a great question. Thanks. So feedback. We want to ask our donors for feedback about our work. And you don't actually have to do anything that people say. The most important thing here is you're developing a relationship and you're listening to them. And mostly when somebody's donated to you, they'll tell you about the work that you've done that they like the most. And that itself will teach you something. Like maybe you'll start to hear from a lot of your donors that there's some particular aspect of your work that they love, and you'll start talking about that more when you're asking for money. It'll feel good to the donor that you're listening to them and you're paying attention to what they say. And some of your most loyal donors and some of those donors who are also activists, they might even have useful suggestions. And I want to give you an example of something that I learned from my donors. And it changed the way that I communicated with donors. So some years ago, I was working a lot on consumer dietary change, a lot with young adults and trying to get them to eat more plant-based foods and become vegan. And a lot of our donors were the parents of our volunteers and activists. And our perception, the organizational leaders, was that a lot of those people were not vegan or vegetarian, and they were unlikely to change their diets, but they were supportive of the work because they really liked what their kids were doing, and they believed they cared about animals. And when we started talking to our donors, what we kept hearing over and over again was, they're interested in becoming vegan. They're interested in learning a new recipe or figuring out what restaurant to eat at. And that surprised us, and it changed the way we started communicating to donors. And we started sending some of the same messages we were sending to our in our outreach to our donors about like how they can make changes to their diet. And this, of course, ties back to what I said before about how fundraising can go hand in hand with accomplishing the mission of your work. But this is something you can only learn by talking to your donors. Oh, great question, Marcela, about how do you define the fine line between listening to feedback and being donor driven? I think that the best way to do this is to give some context of the questions that you're asking. That we're asking these questions not as a decision-making standpoint, but as we know we do best when we ask feedback to a broad group of people. And we like to ask feedback from all kinds of people. And as somebody who's invested in our work, we'd love to hear from you. And I don't know that I've seen fundraisers say to donors, tell us what to do. But oftentimes fundraisers don't give that context. But there is risk in this, right? It's not there isn't a simple answer, especially if you have a relatively small number of donors that you're very dependent on. It is tricky, and I think that I was going to address this later. Maybe I'll get back to it again. But the thing that you're bringing up is that there's an intractable issue with wealth, race, economic injustice, and philanthropy. That as long as we have the kind of wealth inequality that we have in the world, we're going to have nonprofits being funded in unjust ways. And that's not going to end. I mean, there are things that we can do to try to do better. And I think it's also very important for all nonprofits that really want to make systemic societal changes to challenge and question wealth inequality in our society and income inequality. So I'll say a little bit more about that later. But yes, this is challenging. And and another thing, I will acknowledge a lot of what I've been saying so far is really, there's a lot of oppressive dynamics that go in with fundraising, and this is repeating some of that. And I just want to acknowledge that, these are some imperfections. So like I said, I'll get back to that. But again, great question. Okay, so now we're going to do the breakout groups. And I think we're doing good on time, so we'll have 15 minutes to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice having curiosity about other folks. So we'll break out into groups of 3, And what we'll do is have one person ask one other person a couple of questions about that person related to their work. And then the person who's asking the question will paraphrase back to them about their values and how it fits with your work. And so our goal is to meaningfully find interest in this other person and develop a strong relationship. So let me give you a kind of a simplified answer. Thanks for coming, Don. Let me give you a simplified example of this, and then you can let me know if you have any questions. So I'm gonna imagine that I'm talking to Brielle, and Brielle is talking to me as a donor of Apex. And so she's asking me a question about my background. And, I'll say, I care about economic justice because I grew up with class privilege here in the United States, and I would travel to India often as a child. And at some point, I noticed the economic injustice and the great wealth inequality. And I learned to care about animals because by the experience of my family's food history, I learned to have compassion for animals. And so that's like a little bit of my story. And so Brielle, noticing this, might say something like, that's great, you care about inequality, human inequality and non-human animals. Apex cares about both too, and the Global Majority Caucus provides support to marginalized folks in animal protection. So that's just like a simple example. Okay, so before we go on to breakout groups, are there any questions?
Hey, Unny, I have some questions. So
yeah, please.
It's like there are two persons, and then the first one asks the second one. Is the second one is like a donor, right?
Right, exactly.
That we are interested in. Okay, and then the donor will talk about himself, and then the first person will entertain this conversation, showing how it fits his values, fits his work, etc. Right? And the third person will do what?
Oh, great question. Yes, the third person will carefully observe and think about that, and as time permits, rotate roles.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So we'll do that, and let me paste this into the chat. So this the same thing from the slide I just put in the chat. Any other questions about what we're doing here? Great, then let's do breakout groups. Can you do that for us?
I have some loaded up for us. So we'll have 7 rooms, 3 people each, and we'll see you back here. How long did you say?
So for 15 minutes.
Okay, great. We'll see you all back in 15 minutes.
That's a lot, huh? You will leave us alone for 15 minutes.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
We're gonna have some very generative conversations.
See you later.
Okay, there we go.
Join.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Let me get my screen share set up again.
How was everyone's conversations?
I was transported to another universe. Like, it's really funny to be back because we traveled very far in 15 minutes. It was great. I learned a lot with Dean. She's a professional fundraiser, and I learned a lot with her example, with her talking, playing the fundraiser actually.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Brielle. That's exactly what I wanted to ask. Just wanted to ask people's observation. Great to hear.
It was great for me. I actually going to be doing some great follow-up. I got some amazing tips. Like, it was a real life scenario. It was great.
Great to hear. And for folks who are like, this is really easy. If this kind of thing is easy for you, then that's fantastic. What I want to encourage you to think about is doing this more, approaching with folks with a lot of curiosity. If you're sitting here right now and you're like, oh, we had 100 people who donated last year. Can you call one of them up and ask them some of these same questions, show a genuine interest in them? And then, I really felt like our breakout group, we were really getting to know each other, and we have different connections and appreciation of each other's work. And that is one of the other goals I said here, is to get to know other people here, because we want to build a community and build a movement, not just organizations. Okay. Anybody else notice anything?
I noticed that personal stories really work.
Yeah. It's really powerful, right? Does that sound right? Oh, the notice importance of having an elevator pitch ready. That's a great point, Josue, something that I haven't covered here. Yeah, but to be able to summarize your work in simple language quickly is really great, to ask questions about your donors. Well, great. We'll go on to the next thing, and this is the subject matter I said that we'd get to, that we had a great question about earlier, and that I said I'd get to a little bit later. And I, as I mentioned, a lot of this approach, comes from, like oppressive places, and it puts us where our donors matter too much. And one of the solutions that I didn't talk about is grassroots fundraising and peer-to-peer fundraising is, part of the solution to this. And like on a short-term basis, when you're doing fundraising, like this is something that is, like possible to start shifting right now. If we have thousands of people donating small amounts of money, then we're not just dependent on a handful of usually wealthy, white, heterosexual men to support our organizations. It's not a full solution, but it is part of the answer. Community-centric fundraising, this is actually the name of an organization. I think the concept might be kind of clear, is that, where it's the donors aren't the most important folks here, the community is, and this is both non-human animals and the humans, marginalized humans that we struggle for. And the organization is a relatively recent, last several years, organization trying to take on the problem of the oppressive practices within fundraising. And I've been involved in my local chapter here in Minneapolis. Okay, just a little bit more. The next thing that we'll talk about is donor tracking. So to be able to do this work of communicating and relating to donors, we need to have information about them. So we want, their name, their email, their phone number, what their giving is. And spreadsheets can do this, and databases do this even better. And it's something that you can start right now. It's really important to have multiple people to be in touch with all of your donors, and to have like a real cross-pollination between donors and staff or leaders of your organization. And organizational turnover is healthy and good. And creating powerful institutions means that one person doesn't hold all the information and all of the relationships. So I'll say that again. Organizational turnover is healthy and good. There's no exact formula of how many years people should be with organizations, but if our work is more than quite frankly, a personality cult, then it doesn't have to, it shouldn't be about just one person, right? So keeping track of information in a shared way where people in leaders in the organization can access that and be in touch and be in a relationship with donors is really really important. So that the information just isn't in, say, your head or your personal contact, not just there. And along with asking for money, maintaining these relationships is really what facilitates retention. So we're going to review this back to the donor cycle. And we have identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And I'll just repeat what I said before for memory's sake. Solicitation is really critical, but it isn't the majority of the time that we spend when we do fundraising. And now going back, I haven't really talked about retention explicitly, but all of what we're talking about here is what leads to retention. So what we need to do then is, after we've done all of that communication, all of that relationship building, asking those stories, telling those stories, learning about people, communicating our work, is to ask for money. And the first fundraising lesson I learned from my mentors were, if you don't do anything else, ask for money. Now, oftentimes we have to work through whatever issues we have about money to ask. And, as I mentioned before, and that's really important, but we need to ask boldly and directly. And remember that what we're doing is giving people an opportunity to give to something that they believe in. And the worst that usually happens is that people can say no. And I have kind of a funny story. This happened to me twice. I've never offended anybody by asking them for money, but twice in my life, I have asked somebody for money and they reacted as if I punched them in the stomach. They just loss of breath. And it was like kind of dramatic and pretty hilarious, honestly. And in both of those cases, my relationship with them is fine. It didn't ruin the relationship. They were just shocked that I was asking for a very large sum of money, kind of out of nowhere. And really what happened was I didn't do a good job of the stewardship and cultivation piece. And I just went and asked for money again. But like I said, it wasn't a problem. And even when you do a great job of cultivation and stewardship, if you're doing a really good job of asking for money, sometimes you're going to ask for a lot more money than people can give, and people are going to say no. And if people are always saying yes to every ask you do, you're probably not asking for enough money. Because when you're doing a really good job, you're at the threshold or above the threshold of what people can give, because no matter how much research we do, no matter how much information we have and know about somebody, we don't know how much they can give, and only they know that, and only they can tell us that, right? So we have to ask boldly to get bold contributions from people. And when it comes to retention, another thing to think about is with somebody who's donated in the past, that might be a good opportunity to ask them to become monthly donors, which is a very popular way for people to give, and for people who, especially for people who can't necessarily give thousands of dollars, for them to give a relatively large sum of money for themselves is to give monthly. And then sometimes when you're asking for donations the first time, you don't know how much to ask, and let's say you didn't ask for a lot and they gave that amount, and you think, well, I probably could have asked for more. That second time, after doing the donor relationship and all of the communication, might be the opportunity to ask for a lot more. I know that I've had that happen to me, where I asked for a donation and somebody says yes without hesitation. And then I think, well, I probably could have asked for more money, but I'm not going to do that now because they just said yes to what I asked for. But then what I think to myself is, next time, ask for more money. Great. So that is the end of my presentation. I want to, I know we wanted, Brielle wanted some time at the end, but we have probably a few more minutes if people have any other questions. And hi, Pranav, good to see you. Marcela, you have a question?
Yes, it's a weird question though. What do you think about giving like, I don't know, keychains or an ebook or something back when people donate? Because at least here in Brazil, it's a hard culture. There, like people are not accustomed of just giving money away or donating. So we always think of ways we can, I don't know, contribute with the person so they can donate more or they can feel that it's not a one-way street. But I actually talked with some people from abroad, and some people actually think that this is harmful for the movement because you're not creating a donor culture, you're just like giving things back. So I just want to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, this is a really common tactic. I have a few different thoughts about it. Those kinds of things, I mean, like what you really want to attempt to signify is that you're thinking about the donor and you're thoughtful in your relationship with the donor, and giving a gift like that shows that you appreciate them. And sometimes those gifts don't make it appear that way, and sometimes they do. And so think about how to do that best. Some of these gifts, like a keychain, can also it can feed into the other thing I was saying before, the whole it's a way to get your brand out. Like, let's say somebody has the name of your organization. Let's say that you have I was talking to Carla with Creature Kind, and you had let's say that Carla makes a keychain with Creature Kind, and then your donors are walking around with that, and then somebody else sees that, and that can spark a conversation about animals. So like there might be some opportunity of having more conversations that are in line with your mission. Personally, like having been involved in many small organizations, I have found making these gifts to be challenging. Like a keychain is something that, like, well, maybe if I was, let's say I had 30,000 donors and I was going to create 5,000 of them, the amount of time it takes seems like pretty small for how many I'm making. But in my case, when I just have a couple hundred donors and I'm not giving it, I'm not going to give it to everybody because some folks I don't have the address or I'm not seeing them often. So I make 50 keychains, and then the cost on a per keychain basis is relatively high, and the amount of time it takes feels relatively high for how many donors. And so that doesn't feel worthwhile. I don't, and I talk about the 30,000. I think the evidence seems to indicate that in general, these things can be good, because I know that a lot of large organizations do it. But, there's some other things of what I just said that, some things to keep in mind. And, I don't know. Yeah, I want to, profess my ignorance of international fundraising and what the culture is like in Brazil too. So it might be helpful to to ask around in Brazil.
And this will be the way of thinking regarding doing events to promote donations, right? Because I see like little organizations that are little trying to do events and like bankrupting themselves trying to do those things and not getting much results out of it. Do you think that it's good to do like A/B testing, or should we think about it a little bit harder before trying it out?
Oh, that's a great question about events. So events are very challenging things in fundraising. And I have planned many, many fundraising events. They've raised very, very little money. I am a big believer in events, though, but not primarily as a fundraising tool, but as a tool for cultivation and stewardship and relationship building, right? But you have to be very clear in your mind about what you're doing with those events. Years ago, I used to have a banquet for an organization, and in the first year, we raised a $3,000. And then maybe a decade later, we were raising about the same amount of money, but the organization budget was much higher, and that $3,000, wasn't very meaningful. But we continued to do the event because it was sometimes the only time in the year that we were seeing our donors. Yeah, and I feel like I'm answering part of your question, but not the whole question. So just with events, just think carefully about what your budget are and what your purpose is. And by default, don't go to events. Don't just think like, oh, this is the way to raise money. The way to raise money is to do very, very, very direct asks. The best way to ask for money is to call somebody up and say, hey, can we sit down for coffee? I want to ask you for money. And I assure you that people will say yes to that question sometimes. And Marcela, there was another part of your question that I didn't answer. What was the, what else did I miss?
No, I think you pretty much answered everything.
Okay.
It was like just think it through or just test it, do A/B testing. But I think your answer is like think it through a little bit before testing.
Oh yeah, A/B testing. A/B testing, I think I've done some A/B testing as well. And what that means is you do one thing to one group of people and another group to another group of people, and then notice how how their behavior is different. I once sent a letter to ask for donations from one group, and then had a similar group where I didn't send a letter and tried to notice what the difference was, and then use that as results. I mean, the challenge with that again is that doing that on a small scale it can be hard to have like good statistical significance of noticing what the difference is. More plausible if you have an email list with several thousand people, let's say. And Josue, do you still have a question?
Yes, thank you. I've never talked to a donor in my life, so I have no idea how that looks like. But in my head, I see the situation of me being at a conference and meeting a donor and practicing what we did on the breakout rooms and trying to figure out like what interests do we have like overlapping and trying to build that relationship. But what I struggle to figure out is how that relationship actually looks like in the long term, because in my head that scenario is that person has money and they know they're a donor, that's their role there, and so they know I'm there for the money. And so how does that look like without being like awkward or like seeming like fake, like, or am I making sense?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And I remember years ago, I knew this fundraiser who was incredibly capable and had raised millions and millions of dollars, had started multiple organizations. And I was working in fundraising with him. And I remember him saying that, so he would travel around the country and stay with people and ask people for money. And he was great at it. And he expressed the same kind of thing that you're saying, Josue, right? He's had decades of experience, and he was saying like, I worried that when I'm relating to people that I'm not genuine, that like I'm just here for their money, and so my two-part answer is, do your own work around money and your anxieties around that, and recognize that what we're here to do is to give an opportunity for people to partner with you to accomplish the work that they care about. And to whatever degree it seems appropriate and good is to have some of this conversation that we're having right now with the donors. There's plenty of donors that are able to do that. And then, my other piece of this is the question that we're talking about the injustice and donor control of things too. And that's kind of like a broader thing, but doesn't help you out in the moment about wealth inequality. I hope that helps. And I think that we need to wrap up now, and so that I can hand it back to Brielle. Does that sound good, Brielle, or do I have time for another question?
I'm going to take one more question. I saw Hannah had her
Okay.
hand raised, and then
Okay.
I'll wrap us up.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So I have sort of a two-part question just about like frequency of communicating with donors. So if you were going to start, I work for Sentient Media, and kind of ringing up donors and chatting to them is not something we've been doing before, but it's something I'm keen to start doing. So I guess two questions is, one, how frequently would you suggest that you are kind of calling donors and trying to have that chat with them? And does that depend on how much they're giving and how big a donor they are? And the second question is, if you have quite a long list of sort of recurring donors or maybe lapsed donors or people who've given one-off in the past, where would you start on that list with starting to call people? You know, I can't ring 1,000 people sort of in a month or a week probably, but would there be somewhere you'd be looking to start with and target those people first?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I don't have an exact number, and the answer is more about what your capacity is, right? So the answer to the first question is related to the second question, which is to the degree that you have a reasonable capacity for it, is to communicate with donors. And I think I mentioned before, when you're thanking donors, it's hard to do that too much. I haven't heard of that happening. You can do that multiple times a year. You know, one of the challenges and opportunity in our modern society is there's so many ways to communicate with folks, from, you know, messaging to letters to phone calls to text to social media and such. And so that gives you opportunity to do things in multiple ways. But what I also mentioned before, once a month is a great, you know, kind of guideline. If you can do that, that's really fantastic. I'm afraid when I'm saying this that it's going to sound a lot to people, but, you know, your circumstances will vary a lot. And then more directly to your second question about monthly donors, I know the place that I start is I try to start with the folks that are that I have the most likelihood of both getting hold of, and, you know, maybe they're people that I know, maybe they're people who have volunteered with the organization, maybe they're people who have been giving for a long time, and yes, people who have been giving more. That's where I start. Mostly because I think that they're more interested in hearing from me, and I'm more likely to get in touch with them. Yeah, and yeah, you will have to make realistic guesses about our capacity, or you know, I shouldn't say guesses. We have to experience that and notice what our capacity is for reaching out to people. And just one quick note on that, you know, there's a piece of like emotional energy it takes to really genuinely authentically connect and relate to donors. And that is something that, you know, as fundraisers, we learn to cultivate a lot of that, because it's important and powerful for the work. And, you know, people have accused me of being an extrovert, and I don't know what category I fall in that kind of way, but what I do know is that, you know, I started fundraising because my organization needed it, not because I thought I was good at it, or I had any background in it. And I found it was a really powerful way to accomplish my goals. And then I found, well, this is part of that, right? So I really cultivated that ability to connect with people. But, you know, again, self-care is critical, and we want to look at what our own capacity is. So thanks. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So grateful. And it seems like people had really generative conversations during the breakout room. So I'm really glad that people seem to enjoy it. And a few things to wrap us up. First off, I'm going to drop in the chat a feedback form. We would love to hear from you. It's going to just take you 2 minutes. There's only 2 questions required just to get some feedback about how you felt about this session, letting us know if there's any other topics you'd like to see us cover. So please do take some time. As I said, only the first 2 questions are required. The last 3 are optional. So at least take a moment to do those when you have an opportunity. And, you know, many of us, myself included, will open it up and be like, I'm gonna come back to that. And then we never come back to it. So please do that before you before you close out the day, when we're all done here. And in staying connected, we would love to be in connection with all of you. A few ways to do that. So everyone is welcome to join our newsletter at Apex Advocacy and learn more about our other work there. And I just dropped a link so you can check that out. And then for those of you who are folks of the global majority, Black, Indigenous, folks of color in this movement, we would really love to have you a part of our Global Majority Caucus, where we have monthly community check-in, which is a super vibrant space. There's, you know, a great opportunity just to share your challenges, your wins, your celebrations, and see other people that look like you in this movement. It's really important for that sense of belonging and resilience. We also have a resource sharing Slack channel where we share job opportunities, funding opportunities, and more. So the link for that, I'll also drop that in the chat. And our next session in the series is on writing funding proposals. And I'm super excited that we will have Megan from the Greenbaum Foundation coming to speak with you all to share. I know some of you were at the AVA Summit and saw her presentation on writing proposals and pitching to funders there. It will be slightly different version of that with a couple added things in there also around grant writing. And so you can join us there, and the link to register for that is in the chat as well. Those are all the things, I think. Thank you so much for being here. And if you have any questions at all, I'll also drop my direct email in the chat. All right.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Unny. Thank you, Brielle and So Eubanks. It's great what you're doing.
Thank you so
Great.
much. Good to see you.
Okay,
Bye.
see ya. Bye-bye.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
How'd we do?
I thought you guys were great.
Yes, fantastic.